So, Rosie, is it a foregone conclusion he's re-signing July 1st? What'd you make of that?
Yeah, I believe he's the mainstay, right? I think he's the guy that's going to stick around. I think he is. I think he's the best player on the roster. I think that they're gonna, whether they break up the core in some way, shape, or fashion, is yet to be seen. But I don't believe it's going to start with him by any stretch. I think that they like him there. I think that you look at Ovechkin. I mean, right now he just looks like this icon. He's one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, Stanley Cup champion. But people forget how many times they failed in the playoffs, how many times he didn't get it done, couldn't score that big goal, couldn't lead the charge, blah, blah, blah. And then he wins one. I mean, when did he start playing? In like 04 or 5, and took him
Yeah,
like 15 years to win a Stanley Cup, or maybe not quite, but 13 maybe. And
13. Yeah.
it's not easy, and it takes some growth, and you got to have the right formula around you. And no one in Toronto is is ready to wait anymore. I understand that, but you got to understand he's still a pretty young player. He's still growing, and sometimes it takes a guy a while to figure out what playoffs look like, what they feel like. I mean, those series is come and go. It's a blur of a week, and he's only had a handful of them to understand what happens. And I imagine he does want to stay here. If he left and went somewhere else, I think it'd be a big letdown for him. You wouldn't be in the big show anymore. You wouldn't be the big ticket item anymore if you go to fucking Columbus or someplace, and you'd feel like you kind of failed, right? And I don't think these guys get to the level that they play at by being used to just accepting failure. And I think he does want to stick around. And even though they're not jumping off up and down saying, "Oh, this isn't good enough," and we is unacceptable, and we need to overhaul. They're not going to say that in the media, but I do believe they feel that, and they're like they want to win in Toronto as much as anybody. If you want a Stanley Cup in Toronto, I mean, just look at the guys that played 40 years ago. They're still gods, and they didn't win anything. Imagine you win here the rest of your life. You'd be a walking god in Toronto. You could do whatever you wanted. I mean, these guys like that shit. That's why they get as good as they do and try to become what they want to become, is because they appreciate that competition and winning and being the man. And I think that he wants to stick around, and there's positives and negatives to playing in Toronto, and he knows that as much as anybody. But I believe him when he says the things that he says about wanting to stick around and be a Maple Leaf.